Hello everyone, welcome back to Unveiling Mythical Legends. Today, we will continue exploring the 12 difficult tasks of Hercules. In the last episode, we discussed how Hercules bravely faced various challenges, and today we will talk about his 6th through 12th tasks, which are truly filled with danger and tests of wisdom. Hercules not only has to battle fierce mythical beasts, but also faces kingdom conspiracies and the wrath of the gods. This is not something just any hero can accomplish. So, stay tuned, because today's story will definitely open your eyes. If you enjoy these adventure stories, be sure to hit subscribe, give us a like, and share with your friends so we can all witness the heroic feats of this legendary hero. 7th task, the Cretan Bull. Hercules' 7th task was to capture the Cretan Bull. This bull was no ordinary beast. Its origins and legend seem to be the work of fate itself. The story begins with King Minos of Crete. Minos had made a vow to Poseidon, the god of the sea, promising to sacrifice the first animal that emerged from the sea to the god. However, Poseidon cleverly tested him by making a magnificent bull rise from the waters. The bull was majestic and powerful, immediately captivating Minos. He became infatuated with the bull's imposing presence and strength. Minos, unable to resist its beauty, decided to break his vow. Instead of sacrificing the divine bull to Poseidon, he chose to keep it and substituted it with one of his own ordinary bulls as the offering to the god. This act of dishonesty infuriated Poseidon, and the god's wrath was boundless. He decided to punish the deceitful king. Poseidon turned the once gentle bull into a wildly uncontrollable beast. The bull began to wreak havoc across Crete, causing immense destruction and threatening the lives and livelihoods of the island's inhabitants. It became a disaster that could not be controlled. It was not until Hercules arrived on the island that this catastrophe would be addressed. The hero decided to solve the problem in his own way. Surprisingly, when Hercules proposed capturing the bull, King Minos made no objections. In fact, he agreed readily, perhaps because he had long since given up trying to contend with the bull's ferocity. Hercules did not simply chase after the bull. Instead, he used his wisdom and courage to tame it successfully. Not only did he capture the bull, but he also made it obedient and even managed to have it follow him calmly. He rode the bull across the sea, bringing it back to the Peloponnese. Hercules handed the bull over to King Eurystheus, but the bull did not lose its wild nature. Eurystheus was unable to control it for long and chose to release it. As a result, the bull returned to its ferocious ways and began rampaging across Greece once again. Eventually, the bull made its way to Arcadia, where it was slain by the hero Theseus on the plains of Marathon, ending its reign of terror. The 8th task, the mares of Diomedes. Hercules' 8th task was to capture the mares of Diomedes. Diomedes was the king of the Thracian tribe of Bastonia and the son of the war god Ares. This king owned a herd of exceptionally powerful and fierce wild horses. These horses were enormous in size, possessed immense strength, and fed on human flesh. Anyone who entered this land, regardless of gender, would be captured and thrown to these starving wild horses, becoming their food. These horses were not just strange beasts. Their myth was full of fear and cruelty, making them impossible to face without terror. When Hercules was assigned this difficult task, he did not hesitate. He first arrived in Bastonia and found the horses to be as fierce and terrifying as the rumors had suggested. Rather than directly confronting the wild horses, Hercules chose a more clever strategy. He first captured the cruel King Diomedes and threw him into the herd of horses he owned. This move was crucial because the horses, which were originally hostile toward humans, full of rage and even willing to devour humans, reacted in an unexpected way. After consuming their cruel master, Diomedes, the horses became unusually tame. It seemed that their wildness vanished with the death of their king. Next, Heracles successfully brought the horses to the seaside, preparing to hand them over to Eurystheus. However, at that moment, the Bistonians learned of their king's death and, in anger, decided to take revenge by launching a fierce attack on Heracles. Heracles did not retreat. He entrusted the horses to his friend Abderus and went to confront the attacking enemies. After a fierce battle, Heracles managed to repel the attackers, forcing them to flee. However, when he returned, he sadly discovered that Abderus had been tragically devoured by the herd of horses while guarding them. Although the horses were no longer as ferocious, they still retained their strong appetite and ultimately tore Heracles' friend apart. Heracles held a sorrowful funeral for Abderus and built a city in his honor to commemorate his loyal friend. Afterward, Heracles took the horses back to Tiryns and handed them over to Eurystheus. Eurystheus did not continue to use the horses as war steeds or livestock, but instead released them on Mount Olympus, where they became prey for the wild beasts. The ninth task, the girdle of Hippolyta. Heracles' ninth labor was to obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. Hippolyta was known for her bravery and wisdom. She had received a unique and beautiful girdle from her father, the war god Ares, and this girdle became a symbol of her royal power. All the Amazons revered her strength and authority. Heracles was tasked with taking this girdle from Hippolyta and delivering it to Eurystheus, who would then present it as a gift to his daughter, Admete. To accomplish this difficult task, Heracles did not go alone. He gathered a group of brave companions and set out on a journey to the land of the Amazons. They eventually arrived at the capital of the Amazons, Themyscira. There, Heracles met Hippolyta and explained his mission. Impressed by Heracles' bravery and nobility, Hippolyta agreed to give him the girdle. However, things took an unexpected turn when Heracles, disguised as an Amazon warrior, deliberately spread rumors that a stranger was attempting to steal their queen. These rumors incited the wrath of the Amazons, and the warrior women immediately mounted their horses and set out to confront Heracles and his companions as enemies. As the battle erupted, Heracles was forced to face the powerful Amazonian army. In the intense conflict, he struck down many of the enemies and ultimately killed their most elite warrior, Melanippe. Melanippe's death greatly weakened the fighting strength of the Amazon warriors, and eventually, Hippolyta agreed to hand over the girdle to Heracles. She also returned Melanippe's body to her queen as a sign of respect. On his way home with the girdle, Heracles passed through Troy, where an unexpected adventure occurred. King Laomedon of Troy had once commissioned the gods Apollo and Poseidon to build the great walls of his city. However, after the work was completed, he failed to honor his promise to the gods, which angered them. As a result, the gods united to punish him. Apollo sent a plague, while Poseidon caused a flood and sent a fearsome sea monster, which began to devour the people of Troy. Laomedon found himself in a dire situation, and in order to appease the gods' wrath, he was forced to sacrifice his daughter, Hesione, to the sea monster. When Heracles arrived in Troy, Hesione had already been chained to a rock, ready to become the monster's prey. Upon seeing Heracles, Laomedon immediately begged the hero to help save his daughter. Without hesitation, Heracles accepted the challenge, and when the sea monster appeared, he defeated the beast with his fearless courage and expert swordsmanship, successfully rescuing Hesione. However, once again, King Laomedon broke his word and failed to fulfill his promise to Heracles. Enraged by this betrayal, Heracles vowed to take revenge in the future. After completing this series of adventures, Heracles finally brought Hippolyta's girdle back and delivered it to Eurystheus, completing the arduous task. The 10th task, the cattle of Geryon. Heracles' 10th labor was to capture the bull of the giant Geryon, also known as Geryons. Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies, 3 heads, 6 hands, and 6 legs, lived on the island of Erythea, located in the Gulf of Gades. He was the son of Chrysor and a certain goddess, and he was of enormous size and strength. Geryon always kept a herd of remarkable cattle, famous for their immense size, beautiful appearance, and their striking red coats. These cattle were guarded by another giant named Eurytion and a 2-headed dog named Orthus, who was the offspring of the powerful monster Typhon and Echidna. This formidable defense system made the task extremely dangerous. Eurystheus' decision to send Heracles on this labor was not simply a test of courage. It was more like a hope that his deeply despised cousin would be defeated or vanish forever in the face of such peril. However, Heracles never faltered. Even in the face of such a daunting challenge, he bravely set out on his journey. After a long and difficult journey, Heracles finally arrived at the western coast of Africa, where he erected a monument called the Pillars of Heracles, symbolizing his dangerous adventure. However, Heracles' journey was not without difficulties. The scorching heat of the environment became unbearable, and in his frustration, he angrily raised his bow toward the sky, threatening to shoot the sun god Helios. Helios, deeply impressed by Heracles' boldness and fearlessness, granted him a golden ship, allowing him to cross the sea at night. With the help of this golden ship, Heracles was able to reach the island of Erythea, a place filled with unknown dangers. Upon landing, Heracles encountered the giant Eurytion, who guarded the cattle, as well as the ferocious 2-headed dog Orthus. Without hesitation, Heracles displayed his immense strength, first slaying the terrifying dog, and then defeating Eurytion, effectively neutralizing these threats. Once Heracles had gathered the cattle and was ready to take them, the giant Geryon appeared and challenged him. A life-or-death duel immediately began. The 3-bodied giant was incredibly powerful, but Heracles, with his extraordinary courage and strength, managed to kill the immortal giant and successfully capture his beloved herd. These cattle, with their enormous eyes and striking red coats, symbolized Heracles' victory in both beauty and strength. Heracles then drove the cattle into the sea, holding onto the horn of one of the cows, and began his journey across the ocean toward the Iberian Peninsula. Throughout his journey, which took him through Gaul, Italy, Illyria, and Thrace, Heracles faced numerous dangers and challenges. However, he ultimately succeeded in bringing the massive herd of cattle back to Mycenae. When Heracles presented his prize to Eurystheus, the king's reaction was not exactly what Heracles had expected. Eurystheus did not count the slaying of the Hydra or the cleaning of the Augean stables as part of the labors, reasoning that the former was aided by Iolaus, and the latter was done for hire. Therefore, Eurystheus once again demanded that Heracles complete 2 new tasks to replace the original ones. The 11th task, the Apples of the Hesperides. The 11th labor was a particularly challenging adventure, to bring the golden apples of the Hesperides back to Eurystheus. These golden apples were not ordinary fruits. They grew on a sacred tree given to Hera by Gaia, symbolizing the marriage between Hera and Zeus. For Hesperides' goddesses, daughters of the night, were tasked with guarding this mysterious orchard. They were not only beautiful, but also full of power. However, guarding the apples was a fearsome 100-headed dragon. This dragon never closed its eyes, and its 100 throats simultaneously hissed, warning anyone who tried to approach. To make matters worse, Heracles did not know the exact location of the orchard, making his task even more difficult. Heracles' journey began as he passed through Thessaly and arrived at the river Echteris. There he encountered Sickness, the mighty giant who was the son of Ares and Pyreneus. Heracles challenged Sickness and completely defeated him in single combat. Just as Heracles claimed victory, Sickness's father, the god of war, Ares, arrived in person to avenge his son. The battle between these two mighty warriors raged on for some time, until Zeus intervened, bringing the clash to an end with a thunderous strike. Though the conflict took its toll on Heracles, he did not falter. He pressed on with his journey, heading toward the river Eridanus. In the river Pa, Heracles encountered a group of nymphs, daughters of Zeus and Themis, and asked them how to find the garden of the Hesperides. The nymphs told him that only the ancient sea god Nereus knew the correct path. When Heracles found Nereus, he discovered that the god was sleeping. Without hesitation, Heracles firmly grabbed Nereus with his hands. Despite Nereus' ability to change shape, he was eventually forced to reveal the route that Heracles needed to take. Afterward, Heracles crossed the sea and arrived in Libya, where he had a wrestling match with King Antaeus, the son of Poseidon and Gaia. Heracles defeated Antaeus in a fatal manner and continued on his adventure. In Egypt, Heracles faced another son of Poseidon, King Busiris, who, following an oracle's instructions, sacrificed all strangers to Zeus. Heracles was captured and dragged to the altar, but he successfully broke free from his bonds and killed Busiris and his son. After completing these tasks, Heracles continued his westward journey and arrived at the Caucasus Mountains, where he met Prometheus. Not only did Heracles rescue the tormented Titan, but he also listened to his advice and learned how to find the path to the Garden of the Hesperides. Under Prometheus' guidance, Heracles reached the location of Atlas, the deity who holds up the sky. In his negotiations with Atlas, Heracles followed Prometheus' advice. Instead of fetching the golden apples himself, he asked Atlas to retrieve them on his behalf. Atlas successfully put the 100-headed dragon to sleep and was able to collect the 3 golden apples. However, when Atlas was about to set down the sky and personally hand the apples to Heracles, he suddenly changed his mind and decided to deliver the apples himself. Heracles cleverly responded by pretending to agree to Atlas' decision. He asked Atlas to briefly hold the sky for him, using it as a cushion for his head, which would allow Atlas to take a break. As soon as Atlas took the burden of the sky again, Heracles quietly slipped away and successfully retrieved the golden apples. Ultimately, Heracles presented the golden apples to Eurystheus. Eurystheus offered the apples as a gift to Heracles, but Heracles did not keep them for himself. Instead, he dedicated the apples to Pallas Athena, who then returned them to the Garden of the Hesperides, completing the difficult task. The 12th task, Cerberus. Heracles' 12th and final labor was the most difficult and dangerous, to bring Cerberus back to the surface. Cerberus was a 3-headed giant dog who guarded the entrance to the underworld. His venomous fangs dripped with poison, and his back and tail were covered with poisonous snakes, with the tail even resembling a dragon. Heracles was tasked with bringing Cerberus back from the underworld, which would not only test his physical strength to its limits, but also challenge his courage and wisdom. Heracles' journey began when he arrived at Tenneron in Laconia, one of the entrances to the underworld. Here, he received guidance from the priests of the Eleusinian Mysteries, who provided him with instructions on how to complete this task. As Heracles prepared to enter the underworld, Hermes, the messenger god, led him down into the realm of the dead. Along the way, numerous ghosts and spirits appeared, but upon seeing Heracles and his imposing presence, they fled in terror, except for Meleager and Medusa. Heracles almost attacked Medusa, but Hermes intervened, reminding him that Medusa was only an image, and mortal weapons had no effect on her. Upon reaching the depths of the underworld, Heracles encountered Theseus and Pirithous, 2 tragic heroes who had once attempted to abduct Persephone, but were trapped by Hades on a magical rock. When they saw Heracles, they begged him to rescue them. Heracles successfully freed Theseus, but when he tried to free Pirithous, the ground shook violently, forcing him to abandon his efforts. Heracles continued his journey and recognized Ascalaphus, who was trapped beneath a rock. This god, who had once tried to defy fate, explained to Heracles why Persephone was forever bound to the underworld. Heracles moved the rock off Ascalaphus and freed him. Next, he arrived at the palace of Hades, where Hades stood at the door to block Heracles' entry. Unfazed, Heracles skillfully threw a dart, hitting Hades in the shoulder. For the first time, the god felt the pain that mortals experienced. Heracles then asked Hades for permission to bring Cerberus to the surface. Hades agreed, but on the condition that Heracles would not use any weapons. Heracles then set off to find the terrifying three-headed dog. Eventually, at the mouth of the Acheron River, he encountered Cerberus. Fearlessly, Heracles faced the monster as it howled menacingly, grabbing one of its throats with one hand and tightly holding one of its legs with the other. Even when Cerberus' dragon-like tail bit down hard on his arm, Heracles refused to let go, successfully bringing the hellhound back to the surface. When Heracles brought Cerberus before Eurystheus, the king was horrified. Faced with the terrifying creature, Eurystheus was filled with immense fear and quickly gave up any thoughts of keeping the beast. Heracles successfully completed the final labor and returned Cerberus to the underworld. With the completion of this task, Heracles' submission to Eurystheus came to an end.